about the Women's National Commission. We are an NDPB, basically, so a Quango, and we report to the Ministers for Women via the Government Equalities Office. And as Kerry said, you know, we are independent. I think it's quite important. We don't fulfil the same functions as the Forces Society and the Women's Resource Centre, those kinds of organisations. We don't lobby, we don't campaign. We represent, or try to represent, the voices of women to central government and to influence their policy and decision making to make sure that by all possible means they take into account the informed opinions and views of women. We're a four-nation organisation, which means that we do have national commissioners that represent the four nations. Unfortunately, that is the only resource we have for the four nations. So there's only me for Wales currently, and so we try to organise and we rely on our partner membership schemes to gather views and represent them as best we can. So we're funded by government and comment freely on government policy, and we have this 500 partners and 4,500 contacts. I think actually it's larger than that now. So that's really who we are and our history. I'm going to skip through this because it's a little bit irrelevant because it's all changed since I wrote this. So we currently, obviously, we've got 150 letters to the Ministers for Women and Equality, amongst them from Forces Society and others. And these were the options that we were told that we might have following the NDPB review. And interestingly, some of these options, I mean, you know, we've been pretty much told that we're going to be disbanded and that we won't continue. But there are functions that the WNC fulfills that the government still has to do, including consulting and involving women and reflecting their views. They have international treaties with the UN that have specific requirements for governments to do this in a meaningful way. And if they're not going to do it through us, then what are the mechanisms through which they're going to do it? When I had this conversation with the head of the Government Equalities Office, he said, oh, well, Fawcett could do it for us. That's not actually Fawcett's function. You know, we cost £660,000 a year to run this organisation. Actually, you probably have to throw the majority of that at an organisation. You still wouldn't have the independence or the views reflected. You know, but we've made all these arguments, and the truth is that ideologically they are not having resonance. So whatever the rightness of the argument, it's not getting through. So we have to consider our other options as well, really. So, you know, we've had these policy areas that we've worked on historically, and I think we've had significant impact and success through them, particularly on the violence against women, networking campaigns, migration and asylum. We have a Muslim Equality Women's Network. We've worked extensively with government on the Equality Act and been part of the key stakeholder group on that. I'm just going to briefly outline the international work that we've done, because these are, it feels quite a long way from local grassroots organisations, but these things are really important. And as the internal mechanisms get dismantled, these things will become more important for you to be able to use. So the Commission on the Status for Women, where the WNC has consistently acted as a link between the UK government and the UK NGOs and made sure that NGOs are represented at the Commission on a regular basis. We've also been very active on the CEDAW commitments. I have to read this, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, where the UK reports every 4 years, and the WNC has compiled and published the official UK shadow report. Now, other people do lots of other shadow reports, other organisations do, but the WNC has been the government's machinery for delivering its commitments on these international conventions.
Sorry, Adele. Can you just say a bit more about where the convention and the Commission on the International Work, where they sit, who hosts them?
The UN hosts them, basically, yeah, okay. Yeah. So they're UN conventions that we're signed up to as part of being in the UN. So we still have our international commitments under those conventions. There's hosts of information on the WNC's website if you want to look at any more of this. But I'm going to rattle, if you bear with me, I'll rattle through this because some of this is so what really, if we're not going to be there. However, there have to be mechanisms to do these things. So our role has been to bring together the views of women from around the UK, to work with government on key topics, and to keep our membership up and open. I think we have had very good access to ministers and policy making, you know, with some successes and clearly less within the coalition government. I'm not going to reiterate everything that Kerry said because, you know, everything she said I would say, being stood here, wouldn't I, you know. But there are still big, stuck, you know, entrenched issues around sex equality and particularly equality for women that we haven't started to address yet. You know, I've already been talking to the NUT about it doesn't matter to some extent how many women work within organisations, they are still being disadvantaged within those organisations. You know, Kerry put up the statistics about the number of women in the teaching profession. Doesn't mean that they aren't the most disadvantaged group within that profession. So underrepresented. Interestingly, the work of the South West Regional Development Agency and others will transfer to these new, you know, enterprise partnerships or whatever they're going to be. Where are the women going to be on them? Are they going to be the unpaid women, supposed to be part of this big society, picking up all the kind of, you know, the stuff that gets unpaid? Budgets, I mean, incredibly important. I mean, the work that Fawcett is doing is just fantastic in terms of the big national budget. But these are decisions that get made every day in how the cake is sliced. And women's voices are getting more marginalised, I think, in that decision making. And you can challenge it. You can challenge it through the gender equality duty. You can just ask the difficult questions, really. So stereotyping is still going on. So even where you look where there are areas where women are better represented, there's still segregation within that representation. So if you look at local authorities and local government representation, very few women have the economic portfolio. They tend to end up with the social care portfolio. Policy power, you know, all this kind of stuff, really. One of the things that's very interesting about this is that if you've got the time and the energy to take a slight step back and look at what's happening, is this power dynamic, really. You know, because there is a resurgence to reclaim power where inroads have been made to spreading that power out to different groups. And you know, this happens over and over and over again within organisations and within countries, you know, and there's this lashback. And I mean, if you follow the blogs about the Fawcett legal challenge, the judicial review challenge, there's this vitriol of language saying, well, women have had it too bloody good for too long, you know, of course there were 75% of the beneficiaries of the welfare state, we should have it back. You know, and there's quite a strong, you know, I mean, the number of people as a private consultant that I work with who say, well, women have had too good for too long, you have to have a skirt to get promoted, it's not fair, you know, the men, you know, there's this power kind of, you know, pendulum that goes backwards and forwards if you look backwards and forwards over history, and I think it's coming back in a big way. So I can tell you endless stories about that. But really, I think watch the power, and we have to make sure that we keep the power, and that we're not put back into the kitchen, really. Pay gap, I mean, you know, all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's still there, it's still stuck, it's important. Unrecognised contribution of women to the unpaid economy. The Women's Budget Group are also a group who are very interesting to watch. They put out a press release about the child tax decision, and it's really interesting to look at because they are suggesting viable alternatives of way of raising money as opposed to cutting benefits, what they call a Maid Marian tax. So they're worth watching and doing some work with. I mean, again, interestingly, the Women's Budget Group tries to do a UK role. I'd like to see more local budgeting groups, women's budgeting groups set up and doing some work in local communities and activities. With lack of resources, time poverty, I mean, you know, Kerry said all this really, you know, women are time poor. Where is this time going to come from? Things are not like they were in the 50s. You know, one income does not support a mortgage these days. You know, what's going to happen to these already time poor women when they're supposed to contribute more time just to get their voices heard?